Thank you. I have so many questions about what happened on September 11th, but I tried to sort of focus. I can very easily understand why the people who planned this, it seemed that they were extremely focused. They knew what they wanted. It's very easy to see why it came about, because they really knew what they wanted and they accomplished it.
Is it easy for you to understand the culmination of the place and the culmination of the method? Can you feel how anytime anything happens, anything, no matter what it is, anything, something that occurs as you move through your day, or something that occurs at the Twin Towers in New York City, any event that happens ever, everything about it has been orchestrated by law of attraction. In other words, because anyone who holds any intent, this is the thing that's hard for physical friends to get their thoughts around. When you hold an intention, everything that matches your intention is now available to you. And so everything is vibrating in this soup that we call chaos. And when someone activates a vibration, as these people did, and they focus upon it for a long period of time, as they did, almost without any break in their vibration at all. In other words, they were focused purely so that their own vibration was not contradicted. Then everything that aligns with that does.
I guess my question is, why did every person on each plane, every person in the World Trade Towers, every person in the Pentagon, what was it that one theory I had heard
How long do we have here?
Or did every single person attract something?
No, there were three that were the exception to law of attraction. But other than that, it's hard to understand that law of attraction is, in other words, when you choose individual ways of creating, or even the creation that we would call making transition from non-physical, you do not have such a hard time questioning it. Jerry and Esther received news this week of friends who have made their transition, not under those conditions, but under other conditions. And no one takes to this death thing very well. But when it happens more individually, it is easier to reconcile, although it's the same thing. That's what we were saying about the strong point of focus. There was a strong level of focus, and we understand that anyone who knew anyone who made their transition in that way would not be wanting to hear from us that law of attraction was underfoot. But we have to say to you, it is never other than that.
I guess my question is, was there some bigger, like one theory that I had heard was that there was there was a buildup of energy, and this needed to happen, and people voluntarily sacrificed themselves to help with this. Was there some overall...
Well, whatever floats your cork.
Whatever.
In other words, there are a lot of people speculating a lot of things, and bits and pieces of all of it may have vibrational resonance with what really happened. But the reason that we were playing with you a little bit about how long do we have is because where you stand in any moment in time is the culmination of endless vibrations that you've been offering. In other words, these are vibrational rendezvous points. You talk about synchronicity. You talk about serendipity. You talk about these moments in time where magical things happen. And we say law of attraction produces all of those magical times, you see. Think about it. Let's just talk in general terms just a little bit. And understand, as you're listening to this, that these answers are specifically being offered in the response to your query about this focal point, this culmination of all of these things, and how law of attraction works within it. Think for a moment about the vibration of the Pentagon. Why does it exist? Think for a moment about the vibration of the World Trade Center. Now, factor into that it was rather recently an earlier target. And think about the way those who enter there every day must have been feeling. Think about the world attention to that subject and the activation of thought around that. Think about the air rage that's been happening on your airlines. Think about the global discontent with the airline experience. Think about the new laws that were coming into place where there was more restriction, more delay, more canceled flights, more disgruntled passengers, more unhappy crew members. In other words, you cannot not factor all of those in if you're talking about law of attraction. You get a sense of what we were talking about? And we could talk endlessly. We're teasing about how long do we have. You could talk endlessly about the global vibrations that focused in those ways, or about the individual vibrations. When you think about the number of people that could have been in the tower, it's remarkable. When you think about the number of people that could have been on the airplanes, it's remarkable. There was a whole lot of deliberate creating going on. There was a whole lot of physical beings being in the right place at the right time. In fact, what we notice as we look at your planet is that, so much, the majority of you are in the right place at the right time, that it is astonishing that your media spends 100% or nearly so of its attention upon the pockets that don't. There's nowhere near proportionate attention to the well-being versus the not well-being. And so what happens is you keep getting this distorted view, so that when something happens you say, why could something like that happen? And we say, how can it not happen? How can there be such major resistance about so many things that will not, like some pimple somewhere, burst, you see? And you say, but I prefer to cast blame. I prefer, rather than understanding law of attraction, and rather than understanding free will, and rather than understanding that I have control of whether I'm in a situation like that or not, I prefer to cast blame. Because in casting blame, I'm just used to it, and there's just something that feels better about assuming that somebody else has power of my experience, and then not liking the fact that I believe that somebody else has power in my experience, and then getting worked up into a real lather about the fact that somebody else has power in my experience, and then because of this erroneous, misguided choice that I'm making of assuming that someone else has power in my experience, then I will, by law of attraction, end up in some place where it looks just like they had power in my experience. And we say nobody has power in your experience because nobody can vibrate for you. But you must make a decision how you feel, how you want to feel. Do you want to be a vibrational match to something that feels awful, or do you want to be a vibrational match to things that feel good? You make that choice every single day, you see.
I think that's the final part of my question. I could change. Yesterday I could have been someplace where I would have allowed something to happen to be. Today I can choose. It's an ongoing thing. I can choose at any point in time to change.
Well, there are a number of things that we want to give to you about this. Here's a significant thing that is really worth chewing on here in light of your question and what so many of you are feeling around it. In man's attempt to control each other, and we're not talking about any specific group because every group attempts it. In man's attempt to control others, rarely himself. In man's attempt to control others, he has found this ultimate, or what he believes is an ultimate tool, weapon. He works to make you fear death because everyone knows they are going to die. And no one has conscious recollection of what that means. So very creative people have expressed to you what that means and have convinced you that you're probably not going to like it when it happens. Now, just to show you what we're talking about, think about how you may have even been feeling a little bit about what you would like to happen to the terrorists who took the airplanes and crashed them into the buildings. How, just for a little bit, you wanted them to die. You wanted them to be maybe removed from your midst, but you, for a moment, many of you, the feeling of revenge came forth within you. And we say, it is a really tricky thing when the worst punishment that you can ever imagine, that you would wish upon those that you hate the most, happens to those you don't hate. Then you get all scrambled around. You don't know what to do. You lose your place. You fall back into chaos. You don't know what to do about that. And we really believe that the very first step in understanding joyous life is understanding joyous death. Because it isn't going to be until the feeling of death, the idea of death, no longer brings sadness upon you. That you're going to find any level playing ground with which to create in this physical experience. Almost everyone mourns those deaths. It must be because you do not understand death. It just has to be. It just has to be, you see. And so, because you mourn the deaths, then even in an arena of deliberate creating, you say, well, those guys must have really been miscreating. I'm going to really line up my energy so that I don't miscreate and end up on an airplane where I die, or end up in a building where I die. And we say, please do not assume that that was all creating by default, and that the deaths were all unwanted or all not a vibrational match to what was wanted. Because you just can't know that without knowing the individual. In other words, the death process is a natural part of your process. We promise you, if you ever figured out how to keep death from happening, you would start trying to figure out how to make death happen. As the new ones keep being born in on top of you, 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 and you have piles and piles of generations. Piles. Can you imagine what Christmas would be like? You'd be looking for ways to get rid of those old buggers. You would. So why not accept the perfectly natural order of things that has been set forth even before you came forth? You said, we will go and stay a little while. And the length of time we spend will not be determined by anything other than the desire and allowing that is taking place. And at any point that the desire to reemerge into non-physical becomes clearer than the desire to remain in physical, then so it will be. And the perfect balance of all things will be continued as it is orchestrated from broader non-physical perspective, you see. So when you soothe the issue of death within you, then you can begin to talk about the issue of law of attraction. Once you understand law of attraction, then you can begin to understand the art of allowing, and then you are truly free, joyful and free. Jerry and Esther have promised one another. They're just not going to turn the television on for a while because it keeps ambushing them into a place of lesser connection. As you decide you want powerful connection, that even within the television, you will find things that are. In other words, we are not saying throw out your television, although it might be a good idea for a while until you regain your footing. What we are saying is make a determination that wherever you are observing, past, present, future, your life experience, something you're reading in a book, something that you're reading or observing from a movie or a television, that it is your dominant intent to find that which makes you feel good. And so Esther turned on the television and saw a documentary that was filmed in Afghanistan. And she saw beautiful fields and farmers working. And that made her feel better because that's not the picture that she had. And then she saw people having lunch while bombs were dropping around. And she saw a little boy on a donkey who was much more interested in the camera that was pointed at him than he was in the bombs that were dropping around. And then Esther realized that even in that environment where bombs were dropping, more well-being abounded than not. It was shocking to her. It was shocking to her to realize that life was going on. And then she recalled something that she had heard us say about how the way you feel in any moment is always the range between the desire that you hold and the belief that you hold about same. And we offered a story about going to an underdeveloped country by your standards and taking with you your desire for your lifestyle and then seeing the way they live and then desiring that they live the way you live and then observing the way they live and feeling the extraordinary discord that begins to take place in you. But as you look at them, you do not see that discord. Because the range between their desire and their expectation is much different than the desire between what you are observing in their life and your desire or expectation or desire for what they might live.